Welcome back. We are going to look today at the religion and achievements of Mesopotamia. Now, I'm not 100% sure how many of the achievements we're actually going to get through. My in-person kids today, we got through all of them. I'm not sure we'll get through all of them here online. I don't want this video to go beyond 15 minutes. And so I am going to have to kind of cut us off here. Hang on with that. All right. So we're going to look at religion and achievements today in Mesopotamia, specifically mostly religion, parts of achievements. A quick review though for you in case you don't forget, or so you don't forget in case you don't remember. The two most important rivers in Mesopotamia are the Tigris, which is here on the left, and the Euphrates, which is here on the right. The Tigris and the Euphrates flood in the spring, and they bring lots of fertile soil, which is what makes this area here called the Fertile Crescent. You see this dotted line here on the outside? That's supposed to symbolize where the Fertile Crescent is. If I had this slide up here again, it would be green. But the rivers would flood in the spring. They'd bring all this nice, rich, fertile soil, which lets us grow crops. And when we grow crops, we settle down into areas for civilizations, and that is how we get Mesopotamia. So let's look at some religion. Oop, too far. Oops, I have the wrong one pulled up. Hold on, guys. I'm going to pause. Sorry, I keep having to stop my recording. All right, so we are going to look at religion today. Now, a really, really important word that we're going to learn today that you need to make sure you know from this point on, because it's going to apply to almost all ancient civilizations, including the ones you studied in 5th grade about the Inca, the Aztec, and the Mayan, is the word polytheistic. The people of Mesopotamia were polytheistic. Now, polytheistic, if you break that word down, poly, P-O-L-Y, is a prefix that means many, and theistic, or theos here, means gods. So polytheistic literally means that they worship more than one god. Now, this is super important for understanding the religion in Mesopotamia. There were lots of gods, which means there were lots of options when it came to who they worshiped. There were gods of death, gods of war, gods of love, gods of like rain and crops. Kind of like if you think about when you studied the Aztec, Inca, and the Mayan, you studied some gods there too. If you think about like Greek gods, Roman gods, Egyptian gods, all the same thing. They're all polytheistic. They worship more than one god. Now, every city-state was built and dedicated to a specific god or goddess. So if you think of a more example that maybe you're more familiar with, Athens, Greece was built initially to be dedicated to Athena. That's where you get Athens and Athena, how they're so similar. Sparta was also built to the god of war, Ares, or I think maybe it's Roman technically, so it'd be Mars, but you get the point. So each city-state was dedicated to a specific god or goddess. Now, we'll talk about city-states later when we talk about politics, but city-states is kind of what their little areas were. So us in the United States, we have states, we have cities inside of states inside of a country, right? And we have one person that is control of the entire country, our president. In Mesopotamia, all those civilizations worked a little bit differently. They had city-states, and each city-state was its own kind of independent country almost. Normally, now later on in Mesopotamia, we have other rulers and stuff that conquered the entire area, so there was one ruler for everyone. But initially, each city-state had its own government, which means it had its own god or goddess that it was built to. Now, inside of the city-state, we had these really large temples, and they have a fun name. They're called ziggurats. Z-I-G-G-U-R-A-T-S, ziggurats. And they were built in honor of a specific god or goddess. Now I'm going to show you some pictures here in a little bit, but these ziggurats kind of had like almost like a blocky kind of structure like the Aztec and the Mayan did. And that was because there were no cranes, there was no cement trucks, no modern equipment. These were built by hand. And people had to make these blocks. You just don't go out and find these blocks here that you make this from. So they would make the blocks, and then they'd pick the blocks up and carry them over. There weren't even carts or anything yet. So that was another thing. This is the third time my video's gotten recorded. Sorry, guys. Mrs. Keeber called from the office, and I had to answer her phone call. So, all right, this video is really choppy. I'm sorry, but I don't want to re-record it, so we're going to keep going. Anyway, ziggurats. So each ziggurat was built to a specific god or goddess. These ziggurats were built by hand. They took so many years to build because they don't have modern equipment like we had. So they didn't have carts or anything that they could put the blocks on and carry over. So they had to build them by hand. They were very large, big structures. And they were very, very important to the civilization. Now, with these ziggurats and with religion in general comes priests and priestesses. And the priests and priestesses, which priests are male, priestesses are female, they were the only ones that were able to communicate with the gods. So we have the priests and the priestesses, and they were the only ones who could communicate with them, which meant that you couldn't just pray to a specific god and hope that something happened, right? You'd have to go to the priest or priestess, and they would pray on behalf of you. You would maybe bring like a sacrifice of some kind, whether it was an animal or maybe some wheat or something. You'd bring it and you would sacrifice it, offer it to the priest would sacrifice it, communicate with the gods for you. Now, the priests and priestesses had really high standing in the civilization because they were the only ones who could talk to the gods. So if something was happening and they needed to consult the gods, like maybe there was a bad season for crops, or maybe a war was coming and they wanted to consult the gods or honor the gods before they did something or made a decision or trying to figure out something, they'd have to go to the priests and priestesses. They were vital to the civilization. They had to be there because they were the only ones who could make that conversation, which is also why you wouldn't want to upset a priest or priestess, because they could pray on behalf of you and have like bad things happen to you. At least that's what they believed. So here's some pictures of some ziggurats. This one here on the left is a recreation of what they think a ziggurat might have looked like. Now, obviously, over time, this was happened thousands of years ago. So over time, the sand and just erosion has kind of worn away at these ziggurats. And so the one on the right is here what it looks like more today. But they are huge, huge, huge structures. They're not like little houses. They're these big, big buildings. So a lot of wars have been fought over in the Middle East. And here we have some, what I think are American soldiers climbing up the steps of a ziggurat, because this area was where a lot of wars have been fought, like the Iraqi War. Actually, Mrs. Gemmer has been over when she served overseas. She served over in an area where there were ziggurats, so she has some really cool pictures of this stuff. But you can kind of get an idea of how big this structure was. I mean, you have all these people climbing these stairs. Here's where on the right here is maybe a staircase that they could have been going up. So you can kind of get like a frame of reference here of how large these buildings truly are. These little blocks in here, it looks like they had little windows. There were different rooms in the ziggurat. Some rooms you could go in, some rooms you couldn't. Only priests and priestesses were allowed in the ziggurat. There were some rooms that even the priests couldn't go into because they were reserved for just the gods. It was believed that the gods actually resided in the ziggurat, which is why they were built so magnificently. This is a video. I played it for my in-person kids. I'll link it for you on the checklist, so you have it, so you can watch it on your own time if you want to. You don't have to, but I will link that there so you can see that. But we're going to move right here into achievements. Now, achievements is definitely super, super, super important, okay? Because the achievements are probably the most longest lasting thing to come out of the area of Mesopotamia. A lot of historians believe that Mesopotamia is the first major civilization, which means a lot of the advancements that we see come out of Mesopotamia carried over into other civilizations. So let's start with farming. Okay, the main crops, there's lots of crops that were grown in Mesopotamia. It's a big area, so lots of different regions could grow different things. Some of the main ones were wheat, barley, dates, grapes, figs, melons, and apples. So you should know what wheat is. I mean, you've seen it outside. Barley is another grain-like crop that you maybe know of, maybe don't. The two here that you're probably most unfamiliar with would be dates and figs. Now, if you've ever had a fig Newton before, the inside of like an original fig Newton is figs. Now, sometimes they'll have like strawberry fig Newtons where they'll mix some strawberry in with it too, but fig is the initial flavor of the filling in fig Newtons. So I have some pictures here to show you. These are dates, okay? Now, I've never had one of these before, and I've never seen them grown or anything, but here on the left is a picture of dates being grown, and they grow in these bunches on a tree. They kind of almost look like peppers or something hanging from the tree, but they're almost prune-like if you've ever had a prune before. Now, they're not prunes because prunes are dried plums, but they kind of have that same sort of texture. They have a seed in the middle of them. Miss Hurlitz has had them before. I haven't. She really likes them, but they kind of have a different texture. They've got a seed in them. They grow in these bunches. And they're supposed to be really good for you, but you'll notice they kind of grow on palm tree-like trees. The other picture I have here is figs. So these are figs. The one on the left here, obviously, is picked figs. The one on the right here is where they grow on trees. So kind of give you an idea of what figs look like too. I've also never had a fig before. Goodness gracious, guys. I can't get this video. It's killing me here. Okay, so figs. I'm just gonna... Okay, along with farming, right? Before this, farming was very, very difficult. There's no combines, there's no tractors, there's nothing like that. So farming was a very long, tedious process. It was hard to have big fields because it took so long. It took so much work and so many people to work it. We see the development, though, of the plow come out of this era. So the people in Mesopotamia, particularly the Sumerians, the first civilization that was in Mesopotamia, they're looking at this and they're like, we got to find something that we can do. So they construct this plow, and I'll show you a picture of it here in a minute, but they can help till the ground. They can dig down deep so they don't have to actually like physically dig with a shovel to get into the ground. They also invented what was called a seed funnel, and that attached to the top of the plow. And so what was nice about the seed funnel is that you'd have one person standing, so the oxen would pull it, the plow, you'd have one person standing behind the plow and kind of pushing it along with the oxen and making sure it stayed deep down in the ground. And somebody else would stand beside you with a bag of seed, and you'd dump it slowly in the seed funnel, and it would drop seeds in the ground. Because prior to this, they had to actually bend over and put the seeds in the ground, which is a tiring work. So it made it much quicker to plant. It made it more efficient. Less people had to be doing it. Here's a picture of what that might have looked like. Obviously, we don't know for sure. This is a recreation. But you'd have one person who's kind of standing behind the plow, making sure it gets deep in the ground, and then you had the seed funnel, the seeds dropping in the top. Now, let's talk about the wheel. The wheel, I know this is crazy to think about the wheel being an invention, but it was. Okay, we've had the wheel before this point. Like, people had obviously had the wheel, but they hadn't used it in anything. What they had used it in was irrigation, pottery making, and milling. So hopefully you know what irrigation is. Irrigation is what allowed plants to get water when they were farther away from the river. It's a system that brings water from the river down, and you could water your crops. And you actually get water for yourself in your home too. Pottery making, you know what pottery making is. Milling is when you take wheat and you put it in this miller, and it slowly breaks down the wheat into flour. So that was what milling was. Originally, that's what the wheel was used for when it was first kind of invented. But later, they realized that the wheel could be used for other things. Of course, we have to find a way to use it in war, so we're going to use it in our chariots. Okay, when we're fighting wars, chariots are going to have wheels. It makes it easier for us to attack people. Later civilizations, the Assyrians, especially the last civilization that was in Mesopotamia, they were very violent, and chariots were a big part of the way that they conquered other areas. They could come in with these chariots and really take everybody out very quickly. They also used the wheel in carts, so that was another important piece that they used it in. The last thing we're going to talk about here very quickly is bronze. Now, bronze is not a metal that is naturally made. You have to mix together copper and tin. So you mix those two things together, because copper and tin on their own are kind of flimsy. They're not super great. When you mix them together, though, you get bronze, which is much stronger. So we could use it in our weapons, in our tools. And on the right here is a picture of Sargon the Great. It's a bust, actually. So a bust is the head and sometimes the shoulders of a person. And it's made out of bronze. And obviously, it's not stood the test of time very well because his eyes are kind of cashed out. But that is where we're going to stop for today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. We'll talk about writing next week. See you guys.